Have you ever wanted to know how Bungie made games like Halo? My name is Niall Sankey and I've been a game designer for over 25 years. 9 of those years at Bungie working on games like Halo and Destiny. This video will be a retrospective on the Halo 3 mission, The Ark. I'll be speaking with some of my former Halo development colleagues to bring you a rare behind-the-scenes look at how many of the ideas for Halo 3 were conceived and developed. As always, thank you for watching. Now let's get into it. This video will be a bit different since I didn't directly work on the Ark. At the time I was building the next mission, the Covenant, and I'll talk about that in a future video, but I thought it'd be fun to chat with the guys that worked on this mission since it's another fan favorite. Now before jumping into this mission, let's start at the beginning of Halo 3's development. After Halo 2's launch, a small group of developers at Bungie were tasked with developing potential ideas for what would eventually become Halo 3.
My name's Christopher Barrett. I've been working on video games for 27 years or so now. Worked at Bungie for much of it. After Halo 2 was done, I remember that there wasn't really like a plan for Halo 3, but we knew there was going to be a sequel. And so there was a lot of exploration, kind of just, hey, you know, artists keep busy, like work on some stuff. So we locked ourselves in a room in a different part of the office at Microsoft, and we just started coming up with what we thought could be cool missions.
I do remember being around Rob Stokes and Mike Zack and Chris Barrett, you know, the same way that George Lucas and company would have thought about like what new planets should we explore in the next Star Wars movie. We were trying to do the same kind of thing for Halo 3. We knew roughly that we would be going to Earth. We knew that roughly you'd go to a large space station called the Ark. But other than that, you know, we really didn't know much.
I remember we just had markers and crayons or whatever and just drawing out potential missions. I think we generally were trying to just think of cool places that we could visit thematically. You know, what makes a great Halo mission? You know, what kind of things would players want to explore and experience from a thematic standpoint. And so that's how you get things like snowy mountains with giant Forerunner architecture, or a huge desert, because we hadn't done any desert levels yet, right? Where we have rolling sand dunes, or driving through the savannah in Africa or whatever, you know, things like that. It's like a, you know, Super Nintendo game. It's like you gotta have the lava level, you gotta have the ice world, you gotta have the forest, like literally. We were kind of just like, what would be a cool place? What kind of environment could we go to that we haven't done yet?
In the beginning, coming off Halo 2, we had some company-wide postmortem / brainstorming meetings. And one of the big pieces of feedback that came out from the team is that people felt we lost some of the mystery that was present in Halo 1. So one of the desires for Halo 3 is let's go somewhere new, somewhere that we don't know what it is, what it's for. And that is essentially where the Ark came from. And as part of that, we wanted the very first level on the Ark to be very much a Forerunner, mysterious type of place.
So as Rob states here, the concept of the Ark was born from a desire to discover and explore new frontiers. And this is not a story goal, this is an experiential goal. We want players to experience mystery in new and faraway places. So now that this experiential goal is identified, the team then determines the art and story that will support this. At this point, Chris Barrett constructed art concepts for this mysterious new place using a software application called 3D Studio Max. Many different forms were created in an effort to find a form that would ultimately become the mysterious installation known as the Ark.
There are certain references or shapes that just tend to have more evocative imagery, or they have more feel. So you kind of can use that to build lore from that. Kind of started with this one of sort of almost like flower petals, or imagine multiple pieces of a ring that could open and close that had some sort of central structure, something that felt, you know, unique and special and kind of beautiful and evocative, but still had some of the DNA of the original Halo ring. So I think that's kind of where this came from. The other thing that's important if you play Halo is that the skybox has the actual ring extending up into the sky. So it was very important to create a new structure or environment where if you were, you know, on the surface, that it would create an evocative skybox where you could see some place up in the sky that you may go to, you know, in another mission. This was a starting point. I remember talking to Marcus and showing him this, and I think he liked this kind kind of general direction. So then we started iterating in this direction and trying to refine what exactly it needed to be and the exact shape and where land masses would be, etc.
At the same time, the artists would start establishing the look and feel of the missions by building 3D environment concepts.
What are the things that make Halo special? It's beautiful skyboxes, it's fun terrain to explore, it's huge structures, all that kind of stuff. So I think in this case, I thought it would be cool to drive vehicles or the Warthog over sand dunes. And I did sort of an experiment in 3D Max of me just trying to create cool sand dunes and then put it in the editor in the game and see how it felt to kind of drive around them. You don't want it to look like Earth. Like a lot of the Halo levels, you want it to kind of be referential to Earth, like something relatable, but then you play on that, relatability and you on that expectation and you twist it. You throw a weird sky color or strange trees or, huge impossible mountain ranges or whatever. So I think that's kind of what I was going for here.
This mission was also unique in that the mission design and scripting was done by a designer by the name of Francois, who joined Bungie initially as a design intern. Francois was a student attending college when the mission went into pre-production.
My name is François Boucher-Jeunesse. I'm a game designer / programmer that's been doing this since 2005. My first job was at Bungie for Halo 3. Bungie was very generous at the time. They flew me in for a week just to give my inputs on the mission. And so when they flew me in, the goal was to figure out the sandbox we would be using, right? Like what the experience would be, how it would evolve over time.
We had decided to bring Francois on as an intern, but he was still in school when we were doing the mission planning. And we didn't want him to show up, a few months later and just hand him a mission and say, here, go build this. So we actually flew him out and we basically just all hammered on this together. We wanted him to essentially feel ownership over the mission. From a gameplay perspective, we wanted to do more with the Scarab tanks. Of course, we want to do a lot more with vehicles, have it be a more open environment for Warthogs and Scorpion tanks, Wraith battles, that sort of thing.
For me, I very much liked missions that gave you the time to have your setup. So you could go here on the left side, move around, look at the enemies on the right, trying to figure out how you wanted to approach. Surprisingly, making sure the AI would be blind and not see you in that segment was actually a big challenge because there's all of these perception systems that exist, right? And you want to make sure that you give players that space, but not too much. So that was a challenge.
Once the mission plan was established, the actual construction of the mission could start. At Bungie, typically the world artists were the level designers. They would use this whiteboard as a high-level guide and then start to construct spaces that would be fun for Halo's combat and exploration.
There's a lot of different types of environment designers. The one thing I will say is I'm not academic at all when it comes to building environments. It's all intuition and iteration. Like I'll build something that I think could feel like an interesting space to fight and then run around it and kind of get a feel for it and then adjust it. That's generally how I ended up working on Halo missions.
There were 2 lead artists on this mission. Chris Barrett did the initial concepts and layout. The level was then handed off to another Bungie veteran by the name of Paul Russell. Not only did Paul do much of the level design across this entire mission, but Paul was also the artist who clearly defined the language of the Forerunner art style.
My name is Paul Russell. I used to be an environment artist at Bungie, working on the Halo games for 12 years, creating structures, alien and human, and landscapes. In Halo 3, I did make little how-to guides on how to make Forerunner stuff. I think it helped people kind of keep things consistent. A lot of the texture work was drawn from the stained glass work of Frank Lloyd Wright, the kind of filigreed shapes that are repeated patterns and things like that. Nature, leaves growing or leaves falling, wheat, flowers, things like that. They have a very pleasing symmetrical shape to them that is reminiscent of Frank Lloyd Wright's stained glass windows. This little section I really enjoyed doing. Things look a little more sparse outside, and inside they look a lot more detailed. I had that benefit of being in that indoor space, and so I could throw a lot of detail into the column work and the repeated elements there and textures and the floor work. So it's a more detailed environment than you would get in a larger room. A lot of the texture work that I did in order to keep the pixel density the same, I folded a lot of UV mapping, basically just piling as much on one texture as I possibly can to keep the texture memory low. I did things like slicing up columns and putting the tops and the bottoms in the same texture plate, and they're all kind of laid on top of each other.
Many of the large outdoor spaces are built with very loose design constraints. The artist will often just construct a patchwork of hills and canyons, spaces that are fun to drive around and explore. In my previous video, I speak to more of the specifics of how these environments are constructed in defined phases, so you can watch that video for my details on this process. Once the rough spaces are built, the designers will start adding AI squads to test out the scale and flow of the environment. Players and AI need to have objects for combat cover, but it's also important that these objects allow for vehicles to drive in circuits. It's a delicate balance that requires a lot of testing and collaboration between the artists and designers. Adjustments are made, and the team works together to ensure the levels are delivering a cohesive experience.
Once you get a first pass of kind of some hills or some dunes or whatever, yeah, back and forth between the game engine and the 3D program was all the time. It's so easy to make a terrible jump or make something that flips the warthog or whatever.
We had to get the physics right on this one because there's a lot of dunes to drive over, and I remember us having problems with physics and vehicles, so we were tweaking vehicles at the same time as we were tweaking the environment. I do remember having some back and forth about like the specific angle of these dunes, and the vehicle would be crashing into a dune instead of like smoothly going over, so there were definitely a lot of iterations there. And then iterations about the performance that we needed to have to, having a big environment with lots of objects that were visible at the same time was definitely an issue. We're trying to run this on an Xbox, right? So what they ended up doing to give the impression that you were in a large space while not rendering everything at once was pretty much segmenting these sections off with big walls of rock, as you can see here. You still have the feeling that you're in an open environment, but nothing is rendered behind these big walls of rocks. That was a big part of it, is like, how do we segment it properly? And I remember the art team working on that, trying to optimize, essentially.
All of this geometry, all of these cliffs, all these rocks all had to be hand UV'd. A lot of people probably wouldn't care, but that there are very few visible seams of textures on the cliff faces and rocks and all of that was something that I just, spent tons of time just trying to unwrap the UVs and make sure the texture tiled properly and there weren't big glaring kind of geometry scenes and stuff. It's all automatic now. Engines like Destiny or Unreal, you can just take any object and it kind of auto UVs it in the normals, and and then you can put rocks into the sand and the edge of it will be like a smooth, perfect blend.
At this point in the mission, we see one of the most memorable moments in the game, the arrival of the frigate. What started off as a simple note on the whiteboard ended up becoming an exciting display of immersive scale and power, thanks to some very clever usage of the game's engine's toolset, and of course the very talented artists on Bungie's VFX team.
We knew we needed to bring in Miranda. It seemed like actually flying in the frigate, right in your face, having it unload Scorpion tanks would be just one of the major fuck yeah moments. Let's go. It's sort of the turning point from this being a bunch of scattered Marines just trying to survive against the Covenant occupying forces to you turning the tide and bringing the fight to them.
The way it was implemented, the engineers really didn't like me on that one, because if you just have that frigate coming in without any sort of impact into the world, physics-wise, right? There's a bunch of debris lying everywhere. We've just been battling different vehicles and whatnot. So if nothing reacts, it kind of felt cheap when we originally implemented that. And so I started looking into ways to just, I think I just looked into the tools that we had, and it was a debug tool that allows us to create a volume where you could push things. And it was very much done for debug reasons. It wasn't something you were supposed to use in productions, but you could scale up that box and scale up the values in it quite a lot and see what it did. And I think I just put that in the mission and people found it to be awesome, except programmers, because it wasn't meant to be used at all and was pretty expensive to use. And the frame rate was dropping at the time, right? So yeah, I think it basically, people bought into that kind of the full sandbox being pushed, right? During the introduction of the frigate, and it kind of forced programmers to fix it later. So
yeah, you're basically writing checks that they have to cash, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So I think everyone agreed it was interesting, but it was unclear if we could do it. And we had a bunch of scripts running in the background, aggressively delete everything that we could.
That is what designers do, right? We figure out how to use what few tools we have to do what we want, and then we beg forgiveness and help of the engineers to make sure it doesn't break the game.
A lot of the inspiration for the missions in Halo 3 came from previous Halo games, especially Halo 1. The early encounters in the Ark were inspired by Halo's sniper mission, Truth and Reconciliation. We also wanted to design more open-ended environments that allowed players non-linear progression with some opportunities for exploration.
It was something that we wanted to try doing more of. Many of the missions in Halo 2 in particular were very linear, right? And so having some reuse of space where you retraverse under different circumstances is both cost savings because the artists are not building quite as much. And it also, in theory, gives the player a sense of familiarity, like they're exploring a real place that, oh, I've been to this part before, right? It makes it all feel more real.
You've been here before, but with a different vehicle, different way of interacting, and there was very much an increase in power that we give you. We wanted you to feel like you were driving a small vehicle in a big environment and kind of struggling against various vehicles and AI and enemies. And here it was very much like we wanted you to feel overpowered. We gave you a pretty hard challenge before the frigate came in, and after that, the reward is just blow things up, essentially. And I think the dialogue supported that very nicely with tank beats everything types of lines, right?
Pretty much any time Halo hands you a Scorpion tank, it's meant to be like, ooh, here's my candy. Maybe on Legendary, it's still a challenge, but for normal and probably heroic difficulties, it's just like, okay, we're just gonna let you just rampage for a while and have fun, because blowing stuff up is fun.
At this point in the mission, players approach the Great Forerunner Wall that leads into the deeper interior layers of the Ark. Paul Russell was tasked with creating this imposing barrier.
I wanted something big and heavy and foreboding. I remember describing it as being on the palm of the fist that's closing. I think it's so well fortified that it needs that kind of visual sense that this is a serious wall and you have to pass a bunch of open gates and open big metal doors to get inside, and it's very castle-like. This is not a wall to be trifled with. Those doors were inspired by King Kong. They open in leaves like that, and we never actually opened the whole thing all at once and had, because each section raises up. So you have the middle section first, and then it takes the second section with it, and then the third to open the door fully. And there was something about the tribal wall in King Kong that had so many layers of logs to it that it had a interlocking feel to a lot of what they were doing there. They felt like teeth, like a mouth opening, and I thought that was really cool.
As we move into the interior, Francois describes one of the bigger challenges he had scripting this mission. Oftentimes, a lot of effort is put into keeping the experience consistent to maintain the player's immersion.
There's this moment where everyone is waiting for you to open up the bridge. You open up the bridge, and then it turns out pathfinding was horrible for vehicles that big under a very small portion of terrain that way. So very often, and up to the final game, you could see AIs driving off the light bridge. The challenge there too was that we needed to give the impression that it was just a continuous experience, right? So like if there's 3 tanks coming in and 1 warthog in that fleet, you wanted to see that in the light bridge, but I had to recreate them. Like they were deleted at that point, so I had to have script kind of counting categories of objects that you had. And so it was a whole mess up to the pretty much night of release, where I think that was one of the final bugs that we had to hammer out and we're just only partially able to fix.
So if I understand you correctly, you wanted to make sure that if you lost one of the vehicles that drove off the light bridge, that was reflected later in the mission?
Correct, yeah, because you want the game to feel like a continuous experience, right? Like if all of a sudden there's a new thing that comes in, it would kind of feel odd. So it was a lot of manual tweaking and programmers coming in and trying to fix it. But we were only able to fix it partially, I want to say. I want to say that at least like a quarter of the time there's a vehicle that falls off. Ultimately, it's the choice between, with the tools that you have, would you rather try to create a big moment with some flaws in it, or we could have just skipped that section entirely, right? And then it's just, you just click a button and there's some audio that says like, oh, thanks, the light bridge is opened or something. And then you move to the next section and you see the vehicles appear, right? But yeah, it's the choice between accepting some problems, but creating awesome moments.
Once through the wall, players are given this incredible vista as a Scarab enters the area overhead. The art team put special focus on delivering an experience worthy of a Halo game.
It was in my mind that you were landing on the very edge of the Ark. This was the big perimeter wall. and you're coming through it on the other side of it. And I think I knew to get a good view of the terrain and the setup, we needed to be up high. The best views or the best level area introductions, you kind of see your point of interest or objective in the distance, which you see that giant structure, and then the path leading down to it. This is like the first shot where you see the full arc, like the petals or the bloom of the open arc in the skybox. So this is like, in Halo 1, when you first see the halo extending up, we wanted to get that establishing shot here. I don't know how we made this performant. There's a lot of geometry in view here that you can see, but I guess we figured it out.
And I think that was originally going to be both sides of that structure, but we had to cut it down and make just this half of the structure, the part that you play on, because it was so big, and we ended up narrowing it to the one side. We all kind of agreed on the direction that the player should go in on the way down, and I had a lot of freedom to do all the jumps and stuff like that.
And then the other thing that's kind of cool you can see is there's a giant waterfall. Like there's a big hole in the ocean, and all of the water is kind of pouring into this giant hole. Instead of just another ocean, just plain of water, it was like, let's make something that feels very spectacular and could only be in a Halo environment. We used to joke when making levels that, we had to have a waterfall every X number of feet. But, I wouldn't know what to do here, put a waterfall. And so, I guess maybe that was trying to make the biggest waterfall that ever existed.
It'd been a while since we saw a waterfall, so you need to pay it
Exactly.
off. It's at this point that players have their second encounter with the Covenant Scarab. The mission scripting for these encounters was usually very minimal, as the experience more relied on the sandbox design of the Scarab and the environmental layout and constraints presented to players.
Giving you a lot of opportunities to approach the encounter in different ways, which is very much the Halo thing to do, right? Like every weapon has a very different role and different mini gameplay attached to it. So that's just the philosophy of Halo, but in that encounter in particular, we wanted to make sure you could board with a Warthog as well. So there was a lot of work tweaking the environment, the hill before the Scarab, such that you could jump from the hill and just kind of land on the Scarab, right? That's one approach. The other approach, taking off the legs. We wanted you to have various ways of approaching this and make this a sandboxy experience as opposed to a very much scripted thing to do.
A vehicle like the Scarab is just a complexity nightmare. You have all of the problems of an environment, of a 3D object, a cinematic thing, a giant combatant that has to navigate the environment as a sandbox element. Even lighting it properly, because it's a dynamic object, was just a pain in the ass.
The Covenant Scarab took a lot of effort and skill from multiple departments. If you want more information, watch my video on the Storm, where I provide more insight into the development of this feature. The Scarab took a long time to fully implement, and it was only because of the persistence of Jamie Griesmer, one of Halo's key design leads, that the Scarab wasn't cut in the months leading up to release.
The Scarab was very much one of these examples of Jamie fighting for it. I think he had the role of convincing everyone that, don't worry, it's going to work at some point and it's going to be awesome. If he wasn't there, I don't know if we would have stuck with it. But I think the fact that we had people with various awareness and skill set in the game, and that care enough about the game to keep fighting for features like that, right, created special moments like the Scarab.
Certain companies do things great. They all have their specialties. Bungie has always been great at creating these kind of sandbox experiences, right? With great shooting mechanics. Giant bosses has always been an Achilles heel for Bungie. If you want a giant boss, you have 20 people immediately going, no, we can't do that, or it's going to take 6 years, or it just becomes this difficult thing. That was something I always wished we had more of, was big spectacle bosses that were just, fun to fight and were, cool moments, sandbox moments.
Players eventually fight their way into the Ark's cartographer installation. Here, Paul Russell discusses a lesser-known fact about how this part of the mission was constructed.
This whole interior space, all the way through the end of the level, is a redo of Silent Cartographer's interior.
Was it always the intention to reuse that geometry for this?
No, I had actually been rebuilding it at home for fun. And I said to Francois, what if we, since we don't have a plan for the interior of this space yet, what if we just put this geometry in there? And then I said it'll almost kind of design itself, because we've done this before. So that went really smoothly, because it was well designed from Halo 1. So all we had to do is just drop Covenant in there mostly, and then we didn't really have to add that much to the space to make it fun.
So in classic Bungie tradition and form, we once again reuse the space.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you were just building this at home in 3D Studio Max for fun?
Yeah.
Wow.
I always felt like I didn't finish the Silent Cartographer interior spaces. We have these two spines here. See, there's the one at the end there and then the one to the left here. And you can see both, and those run the entire from top to bottom in all the levels. So it ties together all the levels visually, which is something that we didn't really think to do in Halo 1 because we weren't thinking that way in the game. We were just trying to make the level fun, and we didn't have a lot of time to really finesse the visuals or think about what we wanted to do with the spaces visually. I describe it as a spine, and it is that. It's kind of like the main, not a main structural element, but a main kind of visual draw that keeps you centered as a player, that you know where this thing is.
Now, for those that don't know, there was a mission called Guardian Forest that was originally planned to occur after the Ark, but then it was decided early in development to cut this mission. I'll talk more about Guardian Forest in a future video, but for now it should be noted that cutting this mission forced the team to change the story and environment for the ending of the Ark.
Originally, there was going to be a gondola that went to Guardian Forest, and when that got cut, we didn't know what to do with the bottom of this space because we suddenly didn't have a purpose for this entire level, because this entire level was supposed to be a gateway to the Guardian Forest. So we were on the bottom, and I said, what if I make a big round glass floor on the bottom of the thing and we do a fight between a brute and the chief? We have like this arena thing where the brutes are kind of sadistic enough to want to get in here and do a Mortal Kombat style mano-a-mano fist fight, and then Johnson would come in and pick you up.
You're the one that made the proposal for this.
Yeah, it's just another one of my $10 ideas. What if we do this? Seems to be kind of my legacy, like with the naming of the game and everything. The dumb, simplest, non-intellectualized, just me pulling my thumb out of my ass and going, hey, yeah, so what if we did this?
Anytime you can tell any kind of story with the combatants, or the enemies, it just makes the game much better, right? As opposed to just spawning more guys, shooting them, and it's hard because you don't get a lot of custom animations. You don't get a lot of custom behaviors. So finding things like that where maybe this space really felt like, oh, it's kind of an arena. He's put them in the center. That's something you can do, is designers have the ability to have the brutes cheer or whatever. So, coming up with creative ways to use that limited tool set to kind of create interesting moments, I think is, always cool when that happens.
So I've got vague memories of struggling with perceptions and triggering, you're fighting the chieftain and then by mistake you shoot a brute and then they all get triggered. I do remember tweaking this, or that it felt more like you're just fighting the chieftain.
I was bringing stuff I knew about game design in terms of cover and weeding in and out of spaces and giving people multiple options, high and low options to play through levels and stuff like that. And so I put together the upper piece and then the lower piece. There was the ramp piece and then the glass piece were two separate pieces, and we just locked those together. And then once we decided that was going to be an arena in the middle of the thing, I just made it round and put the glass floor in there and made it look like a fighting ring, essentially.
For me, I was just very happy to have the opportunity to play with a pretty wide sandbox during that mission, because some missions were more just, you're indoors and these are the weapons that you have access to. But I feel like we were pretty lucky to play with pretty much everything in the game in our missions. The whole culture at the time that it didn't matter where an idea came from. If you put in the work and you're listening to feedback and working as a team, then it doesn't matter the level of seniority that you had.
And that was one of the great things about that team, is that everybody was invested and involved and would play stuff and give you their feedback and thoughts. And so it was billed from the very beginning as Halo 3 by Bungie, not by any particular director or auteur. And I think that's what we ended up with. It's all of our work combined.
So that's going to wrap up this retrospective. A big thanks to my former Bungie brothers for taking the time to chat with me. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Feel free to drop me a comment. I'm always happy to answer any questions. And if you want to support me, check out my latest solo game. It's called The Razor Form. Try out the demo in Steam, and if you enjoy it, add it to your wish list. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.